Hello and welcome to my very first virtual bake-along. This is my new kitchen. We're going to be making apple pie today, but we're going to be starting off making our own pastry from scratch. Now, I have had a couple of people cancel on me today, so there's going to be less of a bake along and more of like a pre-recorded, because we don't have people actually baking along with me at the moment. We've had a couple of crises that have come up, so you will be getting the recording. I might have to do this in 2 segments because we have about 40 minutes on one Zoom call, and then we'll have a second one. So bear with me, there will be 2 links coming through to you by tomorrow, all being well. Okay, so for me it is 7 o'clock in UK time, 2 o'clock in the afternoon Indie time. So we're going to start by making the pastry. Now I do have my oven on. In centigrade it's 180 degrees. In Fahrenheit it's 350, which is the perfect temperature for cooking pastry, which we are going to do in, I'm going to use this circular bake pan, and I'm going to put a little butter on that just to oil it, which I will get from the fridge, which is just over there. And I do have some butter out as well. I'll use this to oil the. But I have a little bit of grease for the drawer here. Here we go. So really enjoying being back in the UK. Really enjoying the baking that we've done so far. I don't know if you saw that I'd actually made this recipe a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, and it went down really well with the family. My husband loves the fact that I'm doing these bake classes again, because it means he gets to try some of these really nice tasting pieces. Okay, so here we go. So all I'm doing here is I'm using a little bit of the butter that we're going to be using in the recipe, and I'm using the butter wrapper from a previous block. And here in the UK, we do use this is salted butter that I'm using, and it comes in a block rather than the what are they called? Those fingers of butter that we're used to in the US. Now, this recipe, I'm going to measure this out by weight, but of course you can do the same with using a measuring cup. In fact, I probably need to let you know what a cup size is. So this is my grandma's or my mum's recipe for pastry. Really easy to remember, but I am going to just do the conversion. So if I'm using 1 pound of flour to cups, what are we looking at here? We are looking at 3 cups. 3 cups is pound. but the recipe goes like this. It goes half fat to flour, half the fat to flour. So I need half as much butter, which is my fat in this recipe, to a pound of flour. So that's basically 8 ounces of butter to a pound of flour. So I'm just, maybe you can see this. There we go. So I have my scale, and my bowl is sitting on my scale. And I'm going to measure out a pound of flour. And this is just a basic pastry recipe that I'm doing here. So I'm going to have to go into a second. Now I'm using self-raising flour, but you can use plain flour, which is the most common type of flour in the States. We don't really need a rising agent in this particular recipe, but self-raising flour is the go-to flour. You might notice that the flour here is actually very, very fine. To get a similar fineness, you can actually sieve this. I'm not doing a sieving at this point. So 16 ounces is a pound. Let me just get a spoon. I've just got a little bit over here, so I'm just taking a little bit out, bring that back in. So a pound of flour. Like I say, I'm using self-raising flour, but you can use plain flour. It's not necessary for this particular recipe. So I've got my pound of flour in here. Now the fat that I'm using, like I say, is a salted butter. It could be unsalted, depending on your preference. I would add a little bit of salt to the recipe if you're using unsalted. Now, to this flour, which I have in my bowl, I'm going to add my 8 ounces. I can't see anything. Just put this out of the way. Still getting used to the kitchen for these demonstrations. So now I'm going to add, weigh out, should I say, 8 ounces, which is about half of this block. But in the UK, because we're metric now, 250 grams is just a little bit over a pound. So I am going to need 8 ounces. Now we are going to end up making a little bit more pastry than we need. That's 7.2, it's a little bit more. So it's just a little bit less than a full 8 ounces. There we go, 8 ounces. So I've got a little bit of butter left because this is a 250 gram pack. I don't need at the moment. I did try this recipe a couple of weeks ago and forgot that this wasn't 8 ounces, but it was just over, and it didn't quite come together in the way that I wanted it to. So I keep throwing my towels on the floor, knocking them over. Right, so let's take that out in a minute. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my butter, just chop it up into small pieces and put that in. And then I'm going to, with nice clean hands, I'm going to start rubbing the fat into the flour. So let me show you how I'm going to do this. So first of all, I'm going to put my butter into small pieces. I've had this butter out a little while, so it's gone a little softer. And then I'm going to, so this can just be put up really. I'm going to add that to my flour. Now you might want to use a fork for this, or you might just want to go straight in with your hands. So I've just added my butter there that's in little pieces. Looks like it's in one piece, but it is actually chopped into small bits. And then I'm just going to break it up. Now, like I say, I'm making a pound. We call this making a pound of pastry because we're using a pound of flour and then half that flour, which is 8 ounces to the pound. So you can always remember this recipe. You don't need to have it written down. You don't need to have it in a recipe book. It's just something that I tend to carry around in my head, half fat to flour. Like I say, pound of flour in here and 8 ounces of my salted butter. I'm going to go in with my hands. And what we're going to do here is we are going to start rubbing it in. When we rub in, we just very carefully take our thumb across our fingers like this with a little bit of the mixture in our hands. Now you can do this in a KitchenAid. I find it noisy when I'm doing these demonstrations, and it's also, I don't know, there's more love goes into it this way. It takes a little bit longer, but that's all good. So I don't know if you can see what I'm doing here. Let me just come a little bit close to the camera. So this is my butter. It's kind of covered. It's in lumps at the moment. And what I'm doing is I'm picking up a little bit and I'm just rubbing it through my fingers. And this is a light touch. This isn't in the palm of the hand. This is at the tips of the fingers, and just rubbing the thumb and fingers together with the flour and the butter in there as well. So I'm just going to do this for a few minutes. And this is a basic recipe for pastry, for short crust pastry. Now, there are some modifications you can make to this. You could add a couple of ounces of sugar to this, granulated sugar. You could add a couple of ounces of confectioner's sugar, or as we call it here, icing sugar. That makes it really light and is ideal if you're making sweet pastry. If we were doing mince pies, that would be good. That makes a good sweet pastry. But because I know I'm going to make more pastry here than I actually am going to need, I am making a plain pastry, so no sugar. It's not a sweet pastry, it's a savory pastry. Now, I'm going to be making a sweet pie with this. Let me just step back here a bit so you can see me. I am going to be making a sweet pie with this, but the sweetness will be with the fruit and the sugar that I add to the fruit and not in the pastry. I think that combination is really nice. It kind of plays off each other. If I wanted to do a sweet pastry, like I said, I could add a little bit of sugar to this. Once I've done this rubbing in method, which I'm probably about halfway through now. What I'm going to be doing with the other half of my pastry, because I say we won't be using all of it, you can just wrap it up and keep it in the fridge for about a week, and then this time next week you can make something else or make another pie or maybe different fruit. What I'm going to be doing with my savory pastry is making something savory, something called it's a meat pie that we call a beef pasty. I'm actually going to be making that for dinner tonight. So I've got some steak and some vegetables that I will be putting into. It's basically like a meat turnover, which is good. So if you want to use your pastry for more than one thing, you don't want a sweet pastry, and you don't have to add any sugar. It's also less calories as well, if you're watching that. So I'm getting close to finishing this up. I want to show you how I've got so far. So like I say, just with that, rubbing through in the fingers, a little bit of the flour and butter together like this. And then what we're aiming for is the texture of breadcrumbs. I don't know if you can see that. It does look a little bit like breadcrumbs. There's still a few lumpy bits in there, so I'm going to carry on a little bit longer. If we shake the bowl, you'll see the lumps come to the surface. And it's those bits that I'm going to just carry on rubbing into the flour. So this is called the rub-in method, where we're rubbing in the fat to the flour. And when we say fat, and I'll say I'm using a salted butter, we could use unsalted butter, we could use lard, or maybe even 50-50 butter and lard. That makes a very rich pastry. or we could use the vegetable solid, not vegetable oil, but the solid fat vegetable oil option. Can't remember the brand name now. In the States, it's funny how you start to adapt and change. Okay, I think that's probably going to be good enough. So pastry, half fat to flour, and then we bind with a little bit of water. Now, to make this an enriched pastry, we could add an egg. That makes it a little bit more yellowy and tastes a bit richer. But again, I'm just making the base pastry, short crust pastry method here. Fewer ingredients, fewer calories, and it's just a nice, good all-round pastry, which we're going to be using in our pie today. And again, this could be used in a sweet pie or a savory pie. It's the same pastry, the same recipe. If we want to make it enriched, we can add an egg. If we want to add sugar to make it a sweet pastry, we can add a couple of ounces granulated sugar. Okay, I'm just going to wash my hands and I'm going to dive in and make this into pastry by adding some of that water. And like I say, I've already got my oven on. My oven's actually over that side. My oven is on at 180 and it is actually at temperature, which is cool. Right, let me just remove that out for a moment. Right, so there is my breadcrumbs. Should I say my flour and butter that have been rubbed together to resemble breadcrumbs. You see that lighting? Okay, so now we're going to add some water. We're going to add a little bit at a time. I've just got some here in a jug. I'm just going to add a little bit. What I've done is I've made a little well in the center, and I've just added a little bit of water to that. And now I'm just mixing my breadcrumb looking mix into the center of the bowl to make it into pastry. And it's funny because here in the UK, when we do baking, we usually make things from scratch. We don't normally buy the cake. We would go the whole hog and just make everything from scratch. And again, you can do this in a KitchenAid, but it's in there. Now, when you've given that a bit of a mix with the knife, I'm going to just get in there with my hands and start bringing it together. It is a little bit sticky, but I'm just kind of squeezing it together at the side, and I'm pulling in the flour mixture. And I always think when you do things like this by hand, there's a little bit more love, a little bit more time's gone into it, more care, and it kind of tastes better, I think. It tastes better. Right, how are we doing on time? So we're about 20 minutes in. Like I say, we might end up having to do this in 2 halves, just because my Zoom may time out. So just bringing this together, it's all getting quite solid in one big lump. It's just gone on the floor, that's okay. Whoop. Do this towards me. Right, do you believe that's good enough to tip down? Let's see, a little bowl. I'll put that in front of between me and the camera. There we go. Just mop up these little bits. Oh, yes, that's a good pastry. And I say we're going to be using about half of this, and then the other half can go in the fridge. Just bring it up to room temperature before you roll it out. If you're not using this for a day or two, like I said, probably leave. But I have left mine in the fridge for a week, wrapped in saran wrap, in plastic wrap. So I'm just going to cut that in half. And that half, I'm going to put back in the bowl for now. I tap it up. And then cut this in half. Wow. One part is going to be a little bit, so that's going to make my pastry top. And then this one will make my pastry base. And I'm going to need a little bit of flour just to flour my surface. I'm going to prepare the apple. Do this first. Not quite as big a kitchen as I had in the States. Oh, I haven't got my rolling pin out. What I did with it. Still finding my way around the kitchen. One rolling pin. So I did a bake day a couple of weekends ago where I made apple pie. It was actually because my son and his partner were coming over for Sunday lunch, and I'm starting to make it. I've got all my stuff out, and I've started making the pastry. I'm doing the rubbing in pin. Then I realised I don't actually have a rolling pin, so I've had to go out and buy a rolling pin because we did actually get rid of so many things when we did our moves back to the UK, including all my bake things. But I thought the idea would be, wouldn't it be good to get everything fresh and new? Did you ask me? Right. So I'm really sad that no one could join us today for this particular bake along, because I always think the value of a bake along is the fact that we're doing this together, and you can say, Tina, is that thick enough? Is that thin enough? Do I need more flour? Do I need? So you can actually ask your questions as you're doing it, rather than just watching yet another cooking demonstration. But life sometimes gets in the way, which I do appreciate. Hope Becky and her friends' dog are doing all right today. Right, so what I've done there is I've done a rough circle. I wouldn't actually explain how I was doing this. I was just rolling this and turning it and rolling it. So I've got quite a thin pastry now. And if I put my pan on the top, you'll see that the pastry goes around the outside and it is actually bigger than my pan, which is ideal, because then we're going to drag this across and pop that. And I've actually noticed I've got a little hole opening up there. So this pastry isn't too thick, but also I don't want it so thin that it is going to be see-through. And I'm going to use a little bit of the bits off the side with a little bit of water and just patch that little bit there, but also a little bit thin. Okay, and then I'm going to take my fork and I'm going to just prick over the base. And this helps the base cook. It lets the steam out and it gives a more even bake. There we go. And I'm going to leave these bits on the edge because I'm going to need that for my pie top, my crust in a minute. And I'm just patching. That's the beautiful thing with short crust pastry. It's quite forgiving. I'm just patching that up where it went a little bit askew. A bit of water on there and it kind of sticks to itself then. So there is my pie crust. What I'm going to do now is go on to sorting out the apples. Now I'm going to be doing apple and blueberry, which is quite nice. Now there's two ways that you can do your apples. You can slice them and put them uncooked in here, and then you're going to end up with a crunch when you bite into the pie. Or you can cook down the apple a little bit, and that will make a softer mix, and it'll be a little bit more mushy. So it really depends what kind of texture you like in your pie. If you want something crispy and crunchy, or if you want something a little bit more soft and easier to eat. I'm going to do a little bit of a mixture of the two. I'm going to start stewing down my apples. I'm going to be using 4, which is about £1 for an apple this size. These are actually from a local grower's apple tree, which is why they're a little bit unperfect, but that's good. These are Bramley apples. So I'm going to prepare these next. I'm going to cook some of them down, and then I'm going to put some very thin sliced ones on top of the stewed apple. And I'm going to add a few blueberries in there as well as I'm cooking it down. So that's the next thing. I think now might be a good time to stop my Zoom and do the second part of this bake class. We're just over 30 minutes in, and I will see you in the second part. See you soon. Bye. Okay, so I'm going to switch you off for a minute. This is the end of the first phase, and just go and find the second link. We'll give you the second part of the class. See you soon.